Well, hello. Hello and welcome. Welcome to Around the Town with Mark. I am Mark Whalen, your host, and we're always glad to have you tune in and visit with us. Well, I'm very excited about my guest today. Such a delightful person and a very talented person. Author and someone who you're usually used to seeing sitting in this chair, host here at SEC TV. So allow me to introduce Harriet Grayson to you. Harriet.
Hello, Mark.
Hello.
Wonderful to be here. Wonderful to see you again.
Well, it's always wonderful to see you. And how about this here? I'm sitting in your chair.
That's true.
You're on the other side.
That's right. It's a little strange.
I bet it is. Yeah, and of course, what our audience doesn't know is our background here a little bit is I came here at SEC TV long time ago as a guest on your show.
Absolutely.
Talking about some of my various events.
Right.
And then I just, one day after an interview, I said, gosh, Harriet, how do you get a show? And
here you are.
Here I am.
Right, having a good time.
Having a good time and loving it. And so it's a delight to have you, of all people, finally as my guest.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, so tell my audience the Harriet Grayson experience.
All right.
Obviously, we've got some books to talk about.
Exactly.
And your experience here at SEC TV, and we've got events to talk about. So we've got a lot to cover.
Yes, we do indeed. We do indeed.
Yes.
So as you know, and maybe some of my audience knows, but maybe your audience doesn't know, Harriet Grayson also has a pen name. As a writer, I go under the name Anastasia Goodman. Because I write about a Russian-born New York City police detective and all of his exploits. So I've written a couple of novels, and I actually have one upcoming.
Oh, congratulations. A third coming out.
A third one is coming out. Yes, absolutely.
That's exciting news.
It is. It is very exciting.
And I hope everyone's heard it here first.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's here first. So I'm having, my upcoming one is about terrorism, which is quite in the papers, of course.
Yes, unfortunately in our world. Yeah.
Yes, so it's going to be called a terrorist war.
Ah.
And it will be Anastasia Goodman, and my fictional character is Sasha Perloff.
Okay.
So Sasha will be investigating some terrorist activities for the New York City Police Department.
Oh, all right.
Which will take him to other parts of the world, which in my books, Sasha always travels somewhere.
Oh, okay.
So all of my books, Sasha travels somewhere. And he provides, I think, for the audience, a fun and in its own way, informative way of the Russian thinking. He's Russian-born. His parents are Russian. So when we look at what's going on in current events with Putin, his books actually might be useful for people because actually President Putin of Russia is a minor character in my first book, Loose Ends. So you actually meet him twice in the novel. Okay. And you get the reactions of Russians even living in this country to President Putin. And it's actually he's actually quite beloved. He's quite beloved in Russia, and he's even quite beloved in his own way among Russian Americans. Okay. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So definitely you get the Russian connection. The other thing that you get is that an underlying historical theme is the Battle of Stalingrad. Okay. And I have been to Russia. I've been to St. Petersburg. And among Russian people, they believe that their defeat of the Nazis at the Battle of Stalingrad in 1943 was the event of the war. That they actually feel that they saved the world from the Nazis by defeating the Nazi army and then the Red Army moving west, conquering all of the lands and finally landing up in Germany.
Now this begs the question, I was going to sort of go there anyway, as to your background, as to who you are and what made you who you are today in relation to your books and how much of that is connected.
Well, some of it is, some of it isn't. I am of Russian descent. Okay. My family did not come here recently, but I know a lot of people who came, and I'd say it's kind of the second wave of Russian immigration that came in the late 1970s and 1980s. Okay. Under a movement that is loosely called the Refusnik movement, and it was a movement supported by President Reagan of the United States.
All right.
to allow Soviet Jews to come to the United States.
Okay.
So as we have all these debates about immigration and immigrants, immigration is actually a political decision. So you let people in, you don't let people in, and it's all decided by the president and Congress.
Okay.
So President Reagan in the 1980s, when he first came into office, was behind this movement to allow, without visas, without a lot of paperwork, to allow Soviet Jews to leave Russia and to come to the United States. And so these characters in my Sasha Parloff novels are people like that, who came here in that second wave. And I and my husband were actively involved helping, not to resettle in the sense of finding them a place to live, but to assimilate these new Russian Jews into the United States. So we actually did work with a whole bunch of people who came from the Soviet Union, came to Connecticut, to the Hartford area.
Okay.
And we were living in the Hartford area at the time, and they would come to our house. We would talk to them. So, you know, they'd learn English in a school setting, and then we would teach them the idioms and the vernacular of really learning English. We helped some of them get jobs. I mean, we were actively involved. And they always, of course, told us these incredible stories about what it was like to live in the Soviet Union. And some of them had memories, not personal memories because they weren't old enough, but some memory of actually what they called the Great Patriotic War.
Well, that is all fascinating to me, and I'm thinking that that means that your books, even though they are fiction, there's a lot of nonfiction, there's a lot of real true history that you've been able to feed into or feed off of that to create these books. So there's a lot of realism and truism in these books. Yes,
and I'm actually going to have an event at the Babcock Smith House Museum, which is in Westerly, on September 17th.
That's
Sunday.
Oh my goodness, coming up this Sunday. All right, everyone, make sure you get out your tablets or something and write this down. This Sunday.
At 2 p.m.
All right, and tell us at 2 p.m.
2 p.m. And the idea is it'll be the Battle of Stalingrad according to Sasha Parloff.
Oh, all right.
So I'll mix the real facts of the battle with some readings from the novels.
Oh, terrific.
And part of the underlying theme, number one, the Battle of Stalingrad is a very big issue for Russians. And number two, in my novels, I make his grandfather the hero of the Battle of Stalingrad.
All right, okay.
Now, in reality, it was a committee. The Soviets never did anything with one person, except maybe Stalin. So everything else is by committee. But to make it fictional but realistic, I have him as the hero of the Battle of Stalingrad. And the things that happen in the novel are things that actually did happen during the Battle of Stalingrad.
Yeah, see, now that's what I find very intriguing about your books, because there's a lot more going on than the average reader may expect.
Yes, there's always a dead body because they have it at its frame a mystery, but then it expands well beyond that.
Well, you got to start with the dead body for a good story, like
absolutely.
Action story, right?
So loose ends.
Maybe 2 or 3 during the book, right?
You never know.
You never know, right?
So this one, the first one, Loose Ends, there is a dead body, and he's called because the characters are Russian in some way. So the dead man isn't Russian, but his wife is Russian. So that begins that story. The second book, which is Death and Diamonds, it opens up with a Russian jeweler living in the United States who is murdered on the streets, and then becomes the story of who this man is. And then why he was murdered.
And maybe a little espionage.
Yes. There's a little bit of intrigue in that, and always people go abroad. Yes, exactly.
Things about
Russia and America.
And
yes. So in this book, the Sasha goes not only to the United States, but he also goes to Israel. To meet he actually goes for a wedding, but also he meets characters that also kind of move the mystery forward. So we have some of that. In Loose Ends, which was the first one, we actually have the commemoration of the Battle of Stalingrad. So his parents go back to Stalingrad, and that's where they meet Putin.
Wow. These books sound like a must-read, especially like you mentioned, with all that's going on in the world today.
If you want a light way to learn about the Russian thinking, these are kind of interesting ways to get at it, and also to learn about Russian history. So, you know, obviously that's a very important thing. The one that's coming up is terrorism is its theme in terms of terrorist war, and it opens up in 2004 at the renomination conference convention for President Bush in New York City.
All right.
When there were protests about the war in Iraq. So that sort of opens it up, but then we go, you know, we get more involved in terms of the whole idea of President Bush's 8 years in office was this idea about terrorism, and it's much of it true.
Well,
about,
especially
we were of course attacked
post 9/11, so
right,
you've got that aspect of terrorism to work with.
Right, and so there's going to be a thread in there about the terrorism and the connections. And some of the stuff that we're talking about now, which is in that book, is some description about what we call MS-13, which the Homeland Security, this current one was talking about. That is a Central American gangs. And the fear was they go back and forth between the United States and Central America, and they are a deadly, nasty group of people. And they're part of this new book. And again, I wrote this book a couple of years ago, so it's kind of funny that they've come into now major discussion among national figures about MS-13. And the thing that the Homeland Security, our current Homeland Security Secretary said, which is also part of the book, is this idea that you can use a group that does drug and human smuggling, and then why not couldn't they be those who bring terrorists into this country? Because all they care about is money. So with the right amount of money, why not? And that's what currently they're talking about, and what will be in my new book.
Sounds to me like you're a little bit of an expert on terrorism and counterterrorism, and
it's funny,
are you sure you're not a double agent or something like that you're not telling us?
One of the things is, you know, it turns out that all of these books, written several years ago, actually are even more important today. I mean, it's just like
that's what I'm hearing. That's
exactly
what I'm hearing.
I was thinking about these things going on.
You have a little crystal ball going on somewhere.
Exactly. And so that's what it's wonderful that that's now in what people are thinking about. So my books are available on Amazon under my pen name, Anastasia Goodman.
It certainly sounds like they make for some really fantastic reads.
And they're fun. I mean, you know, and that's my as an author. That's what I'm interested in doing. I want to make complicated things simple and fun, and that's what I try to do with this kind of interesting character, Sasha Perloff, and his family.
So even though it can be a difficult and heavy topic because it is so topical for the world nowadays, but you're kicking in that factor that just makes it a very fascinating and fun read on top of underlying truth. Yes,
and Sasha's
realism.
Sasha's this flawed character. Writers like flawed characters. They don't want anybody too perfect. So he has his flaws, and so that's part of making him an interesting person.
Okay.
Right.
And they kind of carry over
from book to book, and you get more things.
So you sort of really start to get to know this character a little bit more in a progression as you read these books.
Exactly.
That's great.
Yes. And terrorist war, I decided one of my favorite writers is the Canadian Margaret Atwood, and she writes, I guess, like sci-fi, but sci-fi with really some intellectual backing. It is fascinating books that she writes. So she's decided, and she's a very successful writer, she's decided to put out her latest book in a serialized fashion, harking back to the days in the 19th century of Charles Dickens, who wrote his great novels in serialized form in magazines. So I don't have, we don't really have magazines like that anymore. So each chapter will be coming out as a Kindle first.
Okay.
And then we're going to try and make it like a comic book.
Oh, really?
Because comic books are to be continued.
Yes. Yes.
And so I'm going to try. I'm not going to have it with panels and the bubbles the way you would in a comic book, but at least the cover has that kind of comic book feel. And then you go and read it, and then, like comic books, you can toss it away, and then
Well,
you have.
I grew up a comic book junkie, so this to me sounds like a whole lot of fun.
So each chapter
love
will be a Kindle, and then we're going to try and make them like comic books, so people can. They're cheap to buy, and then if you want them, you can keep them. If you don't want to keep them, who cares?
Now, have you always had this wonderful talent for writing? Is this something that's sort of been with you all your life, or what brought you into writing these books and becoming the author that you are today?
I think I was always interested in writing. I spent most of my life writing nonfiction.
Okay.
So, and then about maybe 10 years ago, I thought, well, let me, put my pen to, well, now computer, because nobody uses pen and pencil anymore.
Yeah, I guess they don't, do they?
No, nobody.
Well, I have to say I do a little bit,
Right.
but
So then I started to write the first Sasha Perloff novel, and I had spent quite a bit of time going back and forth to Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, which is where many Russians first landed up in America. Recent Russians. So Brighton Beach became the new Little Odessa is what they call it. So I would go there because there were some interesting concerts that were being given there. They were free concerts that the city of New York put on in a park that was right next to the boardwalk in Brighton Beach. These concerts don't exist anymore. But so that's how I started. And I would go to them and I'd see these Russians and I would see some characters, and that became the beginning, the catalyst for creating Sasha Perloff and the mysteries.
Well, I had a great uncle that lived in Flushing, New York, and he was in the rag trade, making dresses and things like that for women. He was a great guy, and he was a Russian Jew. And unfortunately, I was a little bit young when he was alive, but he used to visit and tell stories. Oh, the stories he could tell. I wish I was mature enough to have him still around to appreciate those stories more. But boy, I remember some of those stories.
Right.
Just totally fascinating about his life in the old country, if you will, and then what it was to relocate and to live in New York and reestablish himself and his family and all that. It was fascinating stories.
Well, the modern immigrant, the big difference, I think, between a modern immigrant, almost regardless of where you come from, is the ability to go back home. When my original grandparents
it was a
came,
one-way
trip. You
trip.
never went back,
Yeah.
and that was the end of the story.
Yeah.
But today, immigrants go back all the time. My niece is married to a Russian guy, and he comes from Odessa, and he's gone back home to see. Sometimes they have some family. Even if they don't have family, they have memories.
Well, that's great, because unlike the story of my great uncle, it's you're able to connect with that past. Instead of just hearing that story on a Sunday afternoon, you can still connect with that life and that past and really incorporate that in your life today, which it's always an enriching experience to be able to know other cultures like that.
Absolutely.
And your families and where they came from and what it really meant and means today. So I love all that.
And even as I said, a couple of years ago, I went to St. Petersburg, Russia, which is actually the home of Putin.
Right?
Yes, that's where he comes from, and actually he went to school there. And it's a beautiful city. It actually is a very beautiful city, but it's not a friendly city, and that I think is part of the Russian mentality. Is they're not tourist friendly. I mean, you could go maybe on an organized tour, but my husband and I went to meet people Russian people who had invited us to come. We had met them actually on an Italian cruise.
Okay.
And if people go on a cruise, you get to your table mates, your chit chat, and sometimes people say, "Oh yes, come and visit us," and they don't really mean it. But these people really meant it, And it was very difficult to actually get a visa, because you need a visa, to go to, and this is a few years ago, to go to, maybe 4 years ago, before we got a little hot and heavy about the Russians. It was even then difficult to get a visa. And then when you were there, nobody spoke English. Even if they understood it, they didn't speak it. Except for, good thing, of course we wouldn't have gone if it wasn't for this couple. And they were our translators, took us on the subways and the museums and all over the place. And it was a fascinating kind of experience because of them.
Yeah, because you're really experiencing the true thing. You're not experiencing like you just said, a tourist destination where they're geared towards just making you feel like a tourist. You're living the life.
Yes, we went to a hotel. Nobody spoke English, so they helped us to get a hotel. They helped us to get tickets to the ballet. I mean,
to me that makes it so much more richer. And
absolutely.
So much better. Because then you're really learning and experiencing the real life and not just the life of a tourist.
It was
fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely, because you really got a real sense of what it was like to be a Russian. And then they wanted to come to America, and the U.S. State Department would not let them in.
Oh, even if you were to sponsor them as a family member or something like that?
They wouldn't let them in, and we were supposed to go to Paris. We didn't, but maybe now we can perhaps meet them in Paris someplace. Okay. So that was also an interesting experience, because they tried to get into this country and they wouldn't let them. So, and this is before some of the recent hot and heavy stuff. I'm talking maybe 3 years ago. Even then, there was some problems with getting a tourist visa.
So you have an incredibly rich mind of knowledge of things that you've been able to put in these books.
Yes.
Which I think is wonderful.
And people will hopefully will buy the books and have a fun experience. Go on Amazon and write a great review for me.
Please do that, everyone. I mean, I've known you for quite a while now. I've had the pleasure of hearing you read from some of your books. I've seen them, and I have to say they really are true works of art. They're
so we need people to buy them and then write a nice review.
Please,
and come join me on Sunday the 17th.
The
17th at 2:00 at the.
Tell us again where it is.
The Babcock Smith House Museum. That's like a mouthful. In Westerly.
Okay.
It's on Granite Street. It's easy enough to find.
All right.
And the museum is a wonderful thing. It's a museum of some old names. New England is about as old as we get in this country.
That's for sure. Yep.
And so you get a really so the museum itself is just a beautiful thing to see. There's a suggested donation. It's relatively small. So it's a good way for people to come and see the Babcock Smith House, to hear me read my stories, to buy my books, and to, just have a fun afternoon. And that's all, that's what I can ask of people. So hopefully people will come on out.
It starts at 2:00, as you mentioned.
2:00, yes.
And you will be having readings?
Yes, I will tell some facts, and then I will read some stories. What I would like to read is the stories of my fictional survivors of the battle, who actually have based on real experiences. So I, did a number of years of research, actually, to get to this sense of the battle, because it is such an epic story. I mean, just to give you a sense of it, it's the whole state of Rhode Island. The population of Rhode Island is a little over 1 million people. That's the whole state of Rhode Island. So if you can imagine this, 1 million Nazi soldiers, not all of them German, but Nazi soldiers, face 1 million Red Army soldiers.
Wow.
With almost 500,000 civilians caught in the middle.
Wow.
Okay, so it's so epic that it's hard to comprehend about two Rhode Islands with a half of
Rhode Islands almost.
Right, exactly. in this battle.
Wow.
And Europeans, the way they fought, they didn't fight a day, a week, a month. They fought for months.
Wow.
They fought for, so this started in the summer, and actually the Nazis surrendered in February. So they They were there for months, and it was the first major defeat for the Nazis, and it was the beginning of defeats that would come all along, going back
sort
as
of
the
like
Russian
the beginning of
the end.
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So it's this incredibly epic story. So it really does make for great drama. Wow. And we in this country have done very little about that. There was a wonderful movie a few years back, Enemy at the Gates, which was about the Battle of Stalingrad.
Okay.
Outside of that, I don't think that we've had many movies about it. And that was the only movie that, in a sense, glorified the real sacrifices made by the Russian people, because 20 million Russians died during.
I was just going to say
during the war,
and I'm thinking of my own history of in school of the tremendous loss of life that occurred with the Russians in
I mean, 20 million. We might have lost 600,000 in our American Civil War.
Right.
So 20 million, because the civilian, and this is true, of course, of World War II in general, is that a lot of the civilian population got caught up in the war, whether you were in France or in Malaysia. People got caught up in the war, civilian population, and they truly, truly suffered.
Yeah, and the brutal conditions of
absolutely.
Fighting in Russia winters and all those types of things.
Exactly. And then people will tell you that just as Napoleon was defeated by the winter, and he did not conquer Russia, the Nazis were, Mother Nature gave them winter, and that also helped because the Russians actually knew how to survive in the winter. And
exactly.
The Nazi army came in short-sleeve shirts, thinking that they were going to do like they did in France, plow through the whole country.
Being and out of there in no time at all. And
it didn't happen that way.
Yeah.
It didn't happen.
We have a few minutes left.
Okay.
Please, I know we have some October, two other events that you want to talk about.
Yes, I want to promote the fact that this great studio that you and I share is a nonprofit organization, and we try very hard to promote the arts of our artisans here in the local community. Yes. And so we're going to have, and we have had in the past, art show. So we have an art show on October 12th. Okay. The theme is autumn. So if people are artists, they should contact the studio, either one of our Franks, to contact the studio and let them know they might be interested. All of our audiences should certainly show up, and there'll be beautiful paintings. We usually have a little entertainment. We always have wonderful food, because our two Franks are Italian. They love to eat. So we have good food, good vino.
These are fun events. I try never to miss them, and I encourage my audience, everyone, really, you want to put this on your calendar.
And then December 7th, which turns out to be Pearl Harbor Day, but also we're going to have another art show. It'll be our winter holiday show, and the theme is pets.
All right, great.
Okay, so if you want to buy a photograph or a painting of a pet, dogs, cats, birds, snakes, whatever, we want you to come. And at the same time, we also want artists, again, painters, sculptors, whoever, who have pets, dogs, cats, snakes, whatever you think of as a pet. You have a canvas, you have a photograph, please let us know, and we'd be happy to talk to you about hanging in our gallery.
Harriet, thank you. Thank you for being my guest today and sharing your books with my viewers. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I want everyone to make sure you go on Amazon and get one of Harriet's books. They're wonderful. They're a fabulous read. Put this Sunday on your calendar for Westerly, Rhode Island. And of course, come down to SEC TV Studios for those open houses. We'll all be here. We'd love to show you our beautiful studio. It's a really fun event. We're over by the post office, by Benny's. So no excuses. Come down and see us. Thank you for tuning in to Around the Town with Mark, and we're going to see you again very soon.